So I wanted to record a video going over the pros and cons of working full time while you're in a PhD program. So this is for people who are trying to make that decision. Maybe you're getting ready to start a PhD program. Maybe you're in a PhD program. You could definitely take some of these tidbits if you've already graduated and you are working in a full time academic role, whether you're tenure or non tenure track. So, I am going to go over some of the pros and cons, and at the end, tell you whether it was a good experience for me or not. So, I did work as a full time employee while I was doing my PhD. So, this video is really great for people who are contemplating that um, what do you call it that option and are okay with a quote unquote boring academic job or boring admin job. um, so you're not thinking that it's like above or beneath you. So I'm going to start with the pros and then go with the cons because I love a good pros cons list. I am a lister at heart, so here we go. The pros, which is probably one of the biggest pros, and especially in the job market we're in now, it is September of 2025 as I'm recording this, is getting work experience. There are so many academics and scholars who want to transition to industry and then find themselves in this conundrum of lacking work experience and or the perception of lacking work experience or maybe a certain type of working experience. So working full time does give you that experience. And along with that, the second pro, it gives you a manager or a supervisor or coworkers and colleagues who can serve as recommendation writers for you or who can serve as a reference for you, right? So someone outside of an academic circle that can talk about your work and how you work with each other and your work ethic and all those things. Um, Third, a big pro is that working full time provides a lot of structure. So if your PhD program is anything like mine, there is a period of coursework which tends to be really structured because you're going to course on classes on a regular schedule, you're turning in assignments on a regular basis. So it can provide a lot of structure. Whereas when you get to the dissertation stage, you have to create that structure for yourself, which is why it's hard for a lot of people to finish because it's hard to go from that really structured environment to one that's really unstructured, especially if you're not great at time management or energy management and or setting and holding yourself to certain deadlines. So um, I worked from 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. So you know my days were structured where I was working full time for most of the day. I had an hour lunch break that I could spend doing whatever. So I usually spent that time writing or at least reviewing what I had written before. And I had the evenings, after work, after I got off, and I had the weekends. So because my work week was so structured, like it made my writing time really structured. So whether I was reading some articles, I was going over my literature review, I was reviewing my previous edits, or I was actually writing a chapter, like whatever that dissertation writing looked like I had to be really intentional and really structured about it because I only had so much time anyway. But also because I was so used to having that structure that it was a lot easier for me to hold myself accountable, so to speak. And unless you can do it for yourself and or you have a good advisor or committee that can do it, um, it can be really tough. So having that full-time job gives you some sort of way to structure your day, where you can say, okay, well, I write from this hour to this hour, and then I work from these hours, right? Another big benefit of working full time is the paycheck, right? So, I mean, you're gonna get paid, right? So that's a benefit for in anybody's book, right? I got paid monthly. I was a monthly employee, so at the end of every month, there was my paycheck. Um, Along with that is the next pro, which is tuition assistance. So I worked full time at the university where I got my PhD. So that university had tuition assistance. There are other large companies and organizations that also offer tuition assistance. Um, it's a huge benefit because you're not having to pay that money out of pocket. So if you're not getting any kind of departmental funds, if you don't have any kind of external scholarships or fellowships, you don't want to take out loans. Um, what other way is there for you to pay for school? um, so with tuition assistance, of course, you there's usually some sort of application process that you do that you submit to a company's HR department. You register for your classes, and then your bill gets paid. And so it can vary from organization to organization as far as how that works, but that's the basic gist of it. I prefer tuition assistance programs versus tuition reimbursement programs because with reimbursement, you still got to pay up front and then you got to wait to get paid back. Whereas with a tuition assistance program, they just pay it outright up front. More on that later. Another big pro is skill building, right? You get a chance to work on some various projects, work with different people, build some different skills outside of what you would build in your academic program, which can be a really big benefit. Um, of course, now in this job market, I know so many people, myself included, run into the roadblock of hiring managers want to hire people with very specific work experience, right? Like it's not just general work experience, it can be experience doing a specific task or working with specific software. And they're not so much willing to entertain people outside of that. That definitely happens. It's a reality. It's a reality I run into as well. Um, but you can build some transferable skills. Maybe you actually get to have that experience of working with whatever skill these hiring managers are looking for or that specific software, right? So, always great to have a lot of skills. And then you can choose which ones you actually want to do in your next role. So it's not like you have to do all of them. You can sort of pick and choose. And of course, the more that you know, the more options you'll have. The last and not least that really relates to the first one, and I think is really important for transitioning academics, is working full time allows you to have another identity marker. It's another way for you to define yourself. So you don't have to be plagued with this question of, well, but I always wanted to be a professor, or if I'm not a professor, then who am I? You can be a scholar or practitioner of whatever area, as well as this whatever boring admin job you have or whatever job you have that pays for it, right? It gives you another way to define yourself and to think of your identity a little bit broader and outside of just an academic space. So, those are the pros that I have, and now for the cons. And the first con is kind of a big con, but it can take you longer to finish, right? So if you're working full time, you may not be able to take as many classes. You may not progress through your program at the same rate. This can be a big deal if you have a very cohort based model in your program, whether it's very formal and structural, or whether it's just an informal thing where everyone who's admitted into the program a certain semester, they take a certain course or courses at the same time, right? So it can be something kind of informal as well. Or, introductory students or first year students are taking all the same classes, right? And when you're sort of out of step with your colleagues or with your cohort, that can be sort of a lonely, kind of isolating experience, right? When you're sort of on your own schedule when everyone else is kind of has this shared experience that you're not really a part of as much. So it can definitely affect your experience in the program. Along with that, the second con is that when you work full time, you're balancing your full time work with your studies. Now, because I was a full time university employee, that meant that my first priority and my first role was to do the work that I was hired to do. So, if I took time out for my studies, that was considered sort of a benefit, like a perk. Like, hey, we'll pay for you to go to school. Hey, we'll let you take classes. But first and foremost, you were an employee. So, whatever work I was assigned to do, that meant that had to get done. So, if I had to stay late, if I had to come in on weekends, if I had to come in early, then that's just what I had to do. So I could take time away from the time that I had dedicated to my studies if I had to do work tasks that really had to get done. This can affect, kind of going back to that first one, maybe when you take certain courses, the availability of certain courses. Um, there could be courses in your program that are offered a certain semester and they're offered at a certain time. And if you're at work during that time, then that might mean that you take it a year later or a semester later, or you have to work out some other kind of arrangement for you to get that credit. If it's a required course, then of course you've got to figure out something, right? It's got to fit in your schedule some way. So that balancing act can be very tricky, especially if you're working a job that has its peak seasons and can be very busy. I was a university undergraduate admissions counselor, and August was a really busy month. The beginnings and ends of semesters were really busy for us, so the summer was pretty busy. The end of the year in December and January at the beginning of the year were really busy times. Um, August was a time where we didn't have dates that we could request off. There were times where you had to go to work every day. My boss was very generous with time off. She was generally very understanding, but there were some times where it's like you can't request off for these weeks. You have to be here, and so I would have to figure that into the way that I approached my studies. Was that there were going to be times when I was going to have to be behind a little bit in order to do my full time job, and vice versa. The third con that I have is maybe not so much a con, but really a concern or a consideration. And it can vary a lot, and that is your leave time. So, whether it's PTO or the paid time off, or sick time or leave time, however, it's termed, but the time that you accrue that you can take off. Now, my university, their old tuition assistance policy was that employees were welcome to take any course, but they had to do it outside of their working hours. So because I worked 8 to 4:30, that meant I had to take night classes. And for the first year or two, I left my house at 7 a.m. to get to work by 8. I worked until 4:30, and then I went to class at 5:30, and that class went till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And so I'd get home maybe about 9 o'clock. And then it was, eat a little bit, shower, go to bed, and get up and do it the next day. So it was a grind. It was really repetitive, really routine, really exhausting time. Um, about my last year of classes, that policy relaxed a little bit, and full time employees were allowed to take courses during the day as long as they had the leave time to cover when they were out of the office. So, this is where the leave time comes in. And for us, our leave time was separate from our sick time. So, it was two different buckets. Um, and I know at some jobs, it could just all be one. And because I was a monthly employee, I worked 37 and a half hours. So my day was a 7.5 hour day. 37 and a half hours a week was considered full time. And every month I accrued 15 hours of leave time, and I accrued 7.5 hours of sick time. So basically, I got 2 days of leave and 1 day of sick every month. So there was a lot of, calculation I had to do to see like how much leave time do I have? How much do I need to reserve for just being on leave? If you need a mental health day, if you need to take off for family reasons or some other reason. And then I did have sick time. So if I had a doctor's appointment or illness or something like that, that was a separate pool. But I had to be careful that I didn't use all of my leave time being out of the office taking classes, that if I needed leave time for something else, that I wouldn't have it, right? So there were certain times of the day when I couldn't take classes because I'd have to be out of the office too long and I would use too much of my leave time. I preferred to take classes kind of that early to mid afternoon because I got off at 4:30. So if a class was like at 1 or 2 o'clock, I could use an hour of leave time. I could also use my hour lunch break if I wanted to. Um, and then if I was gone for the last 2 hours of the day, then I could just get out of class and go straight home. I didn't have to go back to work if I didn't have any extra work to do. So that kind of balance and calculation, I think, is a real consideration to think about, particularly if, and this happens a lot at my university, is people would take jobs there just so that they could go to school. So if you start a new job and then you start to school immediately, you may not have accrued enough time to be able to be out of the office, unless you got a really cool boss, which is always nice. Um, but if you've been in your role for a while and then you apply to go to school, it might work different for you, right? Because now you've accrued enough time. So sometimes that could kind of delay your plans somewhat. So going back to some of those first cons that I mentioned, with it taking you longer to finish and trying to balance your work with your studies, like that's kind of one of the considerations you may need to think about as well. Um, is just how you want to use your leave time, how much leave time do you get, how are you accruing it, and how much you think you may need for the other areas of your life, right? So if you get sick, you need sick time. Towards the end of my program, I would take off a day, 1 day a month that I would dedicate solely to just writing my dissertation. So those were days where I would still be on campus, right? I would go to the library, rent a study carrel, bring all the articles I needed to read. If there's a chapter I was editing, then I would bring that chapter or whatever I was doing, right? There would be just whole days that I would do that. And I would have to make sure to pick a slow period at work when there's not a lot going on, where I could do that. When I was really trying to finish, like that last year semester, I was taking 2 days off a month. So, and I would always do like a Thursday or Friday so I could roll into the weekend and I could have, like, instead of 2 days to write, I could maybe have 3 or 4, right? And so then I could get a lot more progress made and a lot more things done. So then when I went to work Monday through Wednesday or Monday through Thursday, if I had to not touch my dissertation, then I could be okay, right? And I could feel like I was actually getting to the end without sort of the piecemeal of the constant balance, right? Of trying to like write on my lunch break and then running out of time because you actually have to eat at some point, right? So quite a bit to think about when it comes to leave time and how that tuition assistance is structured. A little bit more on that. The next con may not really be a con either, but it is the sort of lack of visibility that working full time can create. So, currently in our 2025 landscape, if you think of all the return to office policies, there's the same kind of thought process behind them, right? It's this um, if you're not in the office and you're not visible, then it's easy for people to forget you're there and you're less eligible for stretch assignments, for mentorship, for promotions, and all this, right? And some of that kind of exists in the academic circles as well. I know in my program, it was a big deal for people to be visible. Like the quote unquote water cooler conversations, right? The information you find out when you just talk to people in the hall or you pop into someone's office. People think of you to volunteer you for things or to tell you about things when you're around, right? When you're top of mind for people. Now, that may not be a big deal, depending on, the way your department culture is configured. But I know that was kind of a big deal for a lot of the people I went to school with was, well, if I take this job and I'm not in the department, if some opportunity comes up, if there's a world renowned speaker or lecturer that comes through and they do a seminar with the students, or if there's job candidates that come through the department and they're giving job talks, like the opportunities to, I guess that's networking in the academic sphere, to hobnob with maybe some of the top scholars in your field. um, that can be gone if you're at work all day, right? And you would have to decide if that's a big deal for you, if it's a big deal in your department, or for your career advancement to, happen upon these chance conversations that could really push your career forward. And you want to be available for those. So, another consideration. And the last con that I have is going back to the tuition assistance. Are any stipulations that are associated with that? Now, luckily, my university didn't put a whole lot of stipulations on it, besides the leave time that I discussed earlier. But you could have organizations that require you to stay on and work a certain amount of time after you receive the assistance. And if you leave early, then you may be paying all or a portion of it back. There could be time restrictions on it, which kind of goes back to some of the first cons about taking longer to finish. Maybe there's only so many hours you can take in a semester or in a year. I know my department had the requirement that for a year you had to be enrolled as a full-time student, which is hard to be a full-time employee and a full-time student. However, they had enough sort of filler credit, where we had like some 1 hour seminars and like you could take, your 3 hour research credit, right? So that on paper you could look like you were full time, but you really weren't taking like a full time class load. So you didn't have the work associated with it, but like you could look like you were in 9 hours or 12 hours or whatever's considered full time. So find out about those kind of stipulations, if they exist, can also affect your decision. So that's all I got. That's probably a lot. Um, Now, did I enjoy or did I think that it was a good idea for me to work full time while I did my PhD? And here's the answer to that question. When I think about it now, especially in 2025 and even before then, absolutely, hands down, it was a great decision. Um, I had a mentor tell me before I started my program that I would really appreciate it later. And even though I half believed her at that point, she was actually right. Right now, I appreciate it every day. Now, I still have student loans from my undergraduate and my master's program, but I don't have any loans for my PhD. So I still get a bill, okay? And but not as big of a bill, I guess. So maybe it's a win. Um, at the time, if you asked me then, I started my program in 2008. I know, what a year. I would have said no. I hated working full time. I was the only person in my program who did. And I got more than one side eye from some professors, maybe some students too, who were like, why would you do that? Um, like, why even bother doing a PhD if you're not going to be here full time, if you're not going to dedicate yourself to it? Um, like, are you sure you really want to do it? I'm sure there were some professors who would not work with me, which was fine because I probably would not have worked with them either. Um, and maybe my advisor felt like she was sort of taking a chance on me, kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know how any of that worked. But no, at the time, I was like, I wish I didn't have to have a full time job. I wish I could just have more hours to actually dedicate to my studies. Now, for me, it was like, well, you can work or you can be homeless and hungry. So it really wasn't much of a choice. Um, I would say towards the end, I was trying to configure my life in such a way that I could maximize and create as many hours as I could to write my dissertation. So I would grocery shop for 2 weeks at a time so that I only had to go to the store once or twice a month. And I would go through the store, with the calculator, trying to calculate what was on my list, how much did it cost to see, make sure I had enough money to actually buy the groceries that I needed and or wanted. Because while I did work full time, I didn't make a whole lot of money. Because if you know anything about working staff at a university, especially a public university, you are never going to get paid what you really should be. So that was also a period where I was really stretching dollars a lot. Um, but I would grocery shop for, a month at a time or 2 weeks at a time. I would try to designate a Saturday where I ran all my errands so that I didn't have to do it every week. I, was not hanging out with friends as much. I was trying to free up so much time that I actually used an app and tracked my time. So I got into the habit. I can't remember how long I did it, but it took me a while to build the habit to actually log my time. So I logged how long it took me to get ready in the mornings for work. I logged my commute. I logged the work hours I did. I logged my writing time. I logged how long it took me to heat up my lunch. I logged, how long it took me to drive home. I would log how long it took me to vacuum my floors, how long it took me to clean, how long, just everything, because I wanted to see, was there time that I was wasting anywhere that I could dedicate to my dissertation. And what I found was that on average, I spent about 30 hours on my dissertation, which was kind of impressive. Um, and I also logged like sleep time and stuff like that. So out of all my life's activities, I was kind of impressed that I could actually uncover 30 hours that I could spend on my dissertation, which was almost the number of hours per week that I spent working. So that balancing act was a literal balancing act. Now, also to say during this time, I wasn't married, I didn't have any kids. So that kind of helps too. But that time was, no, I did not like the fact that I had to do it. But I can look back now and really appreciate it. So if I were to give any advice, I hope that this list helped you. Um, if I missed any, let me know. Let me know, did you work during your PhD program? Did you like it? Do you regret it? What do you think about it now? What would you advise a student to do now? So that's what I got.